All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into something that's, well, it's one of the most painful things people can go through: infidelity. We're going to try and deconstruct the deception, look at the psychology behind it, and maybe even see if there are patterns that can predict this kind of betrayal. You see, cheating, it just strikes right at the heart of a relationship. It's not just about breaking a rule, right? It's about shattering a fundamental bond. And for the person who's been betrayed, man, it can set off this absolute whirlwind of confusion, grief, and just a total loss of security. So that brings up a huge question. Is there any kind of predictable pattern to all this chaos? Can we actually find behaviors or motivations that show up again and again? And if we can understand the why, does that help us figure out what comes next? Okay, so first things first. To really get a handle on this, we've got to understand the massive impact infidelity has on the very foundation of a relationship. And it's so much more than just a physical thing. At its core, it's a complete violation of the promises you make to someone. It's a breach of trust that doesn't just, damage the relationship. It can leave behind some really deep and lasting emotional scars. And what's really interesting here is that the emotional damage, it's not just one-sided. Of course, the partner who is cheated on is dealing with a crisis of trust, of self-worth, but the person who is unfaithful, they're often trapped in their own world of guilt and shame, regardless of why they did it. All right, so let's try to get inside the mind of someone who cheats. We're going to look at how they build this complicated web of deception, not just for their partner, but interestingly, for themselves, too. This really gets to the heart of the internal conflict, doesn't it? Someone who cheats is basically living two emotional lives at once. On one hand, they're justifying what they're doing. Seeking a thrill, needing validation, trying to fill some kind of void. But on the other hand, they are constantly wrestling with the guilt, the shame, and that nonstop fear of getting caught. And that fear of getting caught, well, it creates this really vicious cycle. They keep the secret going, not just to protect the relationship, but really to protect themselves. They're shielding themselves from judgment, from having their reputation destroyed, and maybe hardest of all, from having to face their own guilt. So this all leads to a pretty fascinating and maybe controversial question. Can you actually predict this stuff? Are there real warning signs we can look for? Or what about personality traits, or even the type of job someone has? Could that make them more likely to cheat? Okay, so when it comes to behavior, there are some classic red flags. You've probably heard of these. A sudden, intense secrecy with their phone. Unexplained changes in their daily routine. They start getting super defensive when you ask simple questions. Or maybe they just lose interest in doing things together. These are often the first little cracks you see in the foundation of trust. Now, what about personality? This is really interesting. Some research, looking at things like the Myers-Briggs types, suggests that certain traits might be more susceptible. For example, types that are described as seeking novelty or getting bored easily, like ENFPs, might be more prone. On the flip side, types that really value integrity and harmony, like INTJs, seem to be less so. Now, I have to stress, this is not a crystal ball, right? It's just a pattern, not a guarantee. But it's not just personality. Believe it or not, the job you have could also be a factor. Some studies have actually identified professions where infidelity rates are a bit higher. So let's count down the top 3. All right, coming in at number 3 on the list. Teachers, teachers. The thinking here is that the job involves these really intense emotional connections, with colleagues and even students, and you combine that with high stress. Well, sometimes those professional and personal lines can get a little blurry. Okay, at number 2, we have trade work. So think plumbers, electricians, construction. The factors here seem to be things like irregular hours, a lot of time on the road, and just a work environment that creates more opportunities for encounters outside a normal 9-to-5 office. And the number 1 profession with the highest noted rate of infidelity is specifically women in the medical field. So we're talking doctors, nurses. The idea is that it's a perfect storm, really. You have incredibly long, high-stress hours, you're dealing with life and death situations, and you form these incredibly intense bonds with your colleagues. It's a combination of opportunity and extreme emotional need. So, what happens after the discovery? When all the secrets are out in the open, is it even possible to heal from that? Can you rebuild? Can you actually move forward? Look, rebuilding trust it's a huge undertaking. It is not easy. The path forward, if there is one, requires some absolutely brutal honesty. You have to create a safe space where both people can talk without getting defensive. It means really actively listening to each other's pain. It means setting new, crystal clear boundaries. And a lot of the time, it means getting a professional, a neutral third party, to help you navigate all that emotional wreckage. And that leaves us with one last, kind of provocative thought to chew on. We know infidelity shatters a relationship. But is it possible that the incredibly difficult process of confronting that betrayal and rebuilding, honestly, like brick by painful brick, could actually lead to a bond that's more resilient, maybe even stronger than it was before? It's a huge question with no easy answers, something to think about. Thanks for joining me on this explainer.